So the day is in the midst of a year-long affordable housing project in the region. What specifically do you think the legislature should do to help people who can't afford to buy a home or are struggling to rent an apartment?
So I've long been for local control, and I remain to be there. What I think the legislature should be doing is assisting municipalities who are interested in creating more housing in their communities, not forcing them to do it or coercing them to do it with incentives, et cetera. So I do recognize there's affordable housing issue or a housing issue, and I speak specifically to electric boat. You know, I know that my brother, for example, works in HR, and we talk often. And I know that electric boat is, poised to hire, something like 15,000 people over the next 30 years. And I know they're having trouble right now, not so much finding qualified candidates that are willing to come, but they can't get them here because they can't afford to live here. So much so that, you start to wonder, should a company like EB get into the housing industry? And I'm not sure if that's what they want to do. But as far as the legislature, I think the legislature should assist municipalities in creating additional housing where they want to do that.
What kind of assistance or incentives would that look like, or do you have any ideas?
Well, like I said, not holding them hostage, but kind of cutting some of the red tape where the municipalities that want to do it, like we're seeing right now, for example, in Stonington, there's a big debate, and it's really become about affordable housing, but it's really not about affordable housing. The opponents to that particular project are more about that particular project in that particular location, and in fact, those opponents are trying to incentivize developers to develop other properties within the town for affordable housing. So that's what I'm talking about. So if the legislature had more grants that are specific to areas that are sort of blighted in a community or even historic in a community, I think about the thread mill down in Pawcatuck as an example. Right now, where if we could get state funding to stabilize that for the moment, and then that would incentivize perhaps a developer to come in because that's really what the community wants. Those are the types of things I'm talking about.
Another question we're asking all the candidates about abortion. I know you have talked about your vote both on social media and on radio, but just to kind of go over that a bit more again. So you voted against the bill providing protections for people receiving and providing reproductive health care services. You did say that you support current state law allowing termination of pregnancy up until the fetus is viable, but had other issues with the bill. So can you talk a bit more about your no vote there?
Sure. Yeah. So there's two aspects to that bill. One was sort of a legal aspect that gets super into the weeds and is boring to talk about. But in short, each state has to acknowledge each other's. They give full faith and credit, if you will. That's what it actually says in the Constitution, to other states' laws. So, for example, if you live in Connecticut where fireworks are illegal and you go to New Hampshire and then you buy fireworks and light fireworks off there, we can't arrest you when you come back here because you violated our laws in New Hampshire. It doesn't work like that. That's not how our system of government works. And the legal part of that bill was a lot of mumbo jumbo, but it basically did that where we said we were not going to give full faith and credit to other states, and likewise, it was out of fear that other states wouldn't give full faith and credit to us. But all that is specifically prohibited in the Constitution. The major part of that bill, though, was the second part. That was the medical part of it. And what was going on there was we extended the ability for surgical abortions to be done by PAs without consultation with a physician. And I think the important thing to know there is that in this state, minors can go and get abortions and terminate pregnancies without parental consent. And look, I've been a police officer for 20 years, okay? Is that an uncomfortable proposition? Sure. To know that a 13, 14, 15-year-old girl can go get an abortion without parental consent, yeah, that's uncomfortable. But as a police officer and seeing the things that I've seen, I certainly understand why that needs to be. But for goodness sakes, can we at least have that child, consult with a physician before we have that? And the Connecticut Medical Society agreed. And I'm going to be honest about this. It appears to me that, the Roe v. Wade decision was coming down. That was run as a political vote to try to, get folks like me in the upcoming election. But frankly, I thought it was a risk to young ladies, and that's why I voted against it. The Medical Society agreed. They said, hey, listen, if access to abortion is a problem in the state, we can work on that. But let's get a working group to do it in a safe way. And that was their testimony. And I think it's also important to know that abortions are down 1/3 due to advancements in contraception and availability of contraception. So to say that, well, people are having trouble finding abilities to get an abortion, I think is a difficult thing to really wrap your head around. I think it was more of a political vote, but it had risk in it that I didn't want to take. Regarding abortion, as you said, yes, I support Connecticut's laws. Look, The question of an abortion to me as a legislator, not as an individual or a Christian or anything, as a legislator is it the role of government to make that decision for somebody? This is why I vehemently oppose vaccine mandates. I don't think it's the role of government. I believe in vaccines. I've been very public about that. I've got my vaccine through COVID. I get my flu shot every year, as do my children, have all of their vaccines, my wife, etc. But it's not the role, just because I believe in it doesn't mean it's the role of government to tell people to do that. All right. So what makes abortion a little bit muddy on that is because the question becomes, when does that growing, use whatever word you want, baby, fetus, I'm not trying to get into the, that, but at what point does that life entitled to the rights guaranteed to all of us in the Constitution? And in Connecticut, that is defined basically at viability. So when that, again, baby, fetus, can survive outside the mother's body, at that point in time, the state of Connecticut recognizes it as its own life and therefore cannot be terminated. And I think objectively, from a standpoint of American government and how we operate, I think that's where government's role should be, to say, okay, when the baby can't survive on its own, it's part of your body, but once it can, it's its own life. And I think that that's exactly where it should be. It's been like that in this state for 30 years or more. I don't see it changing.
Next question, the state surplus has grown to over $4 billion. Do you support the decision to use some of that to lower the state's pension debt, or do you think more should be returned to the taxpayer?
Well, look, we have to lower the pension debt, but I do think more should go back to the taxpayer. This is exactly what I talk about when we talk about the implementer in 2022. Republicans, including myself, proposed an amendment with a $1.2 billion tax cut. We lowered the income tax by 1%. We lowered the meals tax. We accelerated the income tax phase out for pensioners to keep some of our senior folks here, and eliminated the HUT tax. Working families are suffering, and the average working person continues to get squeezed by both sides. All right, and it's just a fact that we have a manufacturing problem, we have a pipeline problem. I walk into plenty of restaurants. I patronize the businesses in the district often. I say, how's business? They all tell me the same thing: having trouble getting help. We need people to get back to work, but unfortunately, when they're getting squeezed by taxes, the working people are getting squeezed by taxes, and it's going out the door in unjustifiable spending. That's a problem. So do we have to pay down pension debt? Yeah. But I think it's important to know that we have a major pension debt because of 50 years of failed policy in the state of Connecticut. The reason we have a surplus now is from a bipartisan budget in 2017 when the legislature by party was a lot closer. It's no secret I'm not a big fan of partisan politics. Everybody knows that. But it does work better when we're closer. They had 18 to 18 in the Senate, and I forget the exact numbers in the House, but they were much closer. They were able to put forth a bipartisan budget and boost up that rainy day fund. And let's not lose track of the fact that a lot of that was federal funding, too, that came in, that got spent a lot of places that helped us get to where we were. And some of that, again, we talk about government money. That's the people's money. And I think that's something that we've lost track of, honestly, Erica, is like, the government is some entity that we don't have control of. That's not the case. We, the people, do have control of the government, and everything that's government spending is our spending. That's money that came from us somehow or another. They call it fines, they call it fees, they call it taxes. It's all the same thing. It's money that you've earned that they're taking. And that's fine. Look, I've made a career out of getting paid by taxpayer dollars. That's, I'm a police officer. But, government needs to do things in the most efficient way possible. And at the end of the day, in an ideal world, government took exactly what from the people what it needed to spend for legitimate purpose. Now, that'll never happen. I mean, that's a perfect world, but that should be the goal. So we're running that big of a surplus. And the other thing is, just really quickly, I'm sorry to go down this rabbit hole, but the pension's backed up by a lot of things, not the least of which is the lottery, which is expanded in last year's legislation.
And getting back to one thing you mentioned, and I hear this all the time too, about people having trouble getting help. What do you think the legislature could do, or what do you want to see the legislature do to, help these businesses that are struggling to hire or help Connecticut get more people to fill those positions?
Stop incentivizing people to not work. Mm-hmm. That's how. Because, listen, every time I say something like that, somebody wants to tell me about a person who's completely incapable of working. Nobody has problem taking my tax dollars and helping support somebody who can't work. But when you have a whole bunch of people who have been able to calculate, well, my after-tax income is going to be less than if I just stay on the state. And that's the problem. We've incentivized people. We did it through COVID. We paid people, additional unemployment to stay home. That was what started it. And I think part of that is, you get people get into a funk. It's like, You go on vacation for 3 weeks and then you come back. Are you as productive that Monday morning as you were the day you left? No. You got to, you kind of ease back in, right? So I think a lot of people got into that sort of funk, especially in the hospitality industry. They were out of work, and look, I don't agree with that either, but that was no fault of theirs. But now we got to get them back to work. We have to disincentivize people to not work. That's the problem. I calculated it a while back. I'm not sure this number is still accurate, but this was probably several years ago. I did a little bit of research and calculated that if you were making less than $16.25 an hour in the state of Connecticut, you were better off on not working at all and just staying on all the social services that are available to you, even if you're capable of working. That's a broken system. And frankly, look, if that was the answer, if unemployment, social services, welfare was the answer to poverty, they should read us a score once in a while, right? Every once in a while we should hear, well, okay, the need's decreasing, it's going down, we're solving the problem. But it's not the case. Every year the need grows greater, the program grows greater, and as it grows greater, it gets more expensive. And by more expensive, I don't mean just the amount of folks that we're supporting, because if I take a $100 bill out of my pocket and give it to you, you have $100, right? But if I give it to the government, my $100, and then they got to figure out who's going to get it, you'll be lucky to end up with $20. So most of the charitable donation, if that's what you want to call it, that I'm giving to help folks get ahead and get that hand up that they need, that everybody wants to give them, or to help folks who physically can't go to work every day and need to survive in the world, and we need to take care of each other as a community. For the people who truly can't do it, by all means. But again, the direct aid to them is going to be a percentage of what you're taking from everybody else because of the way government operates. It's gotten too big, and we need to rein it in.
I think some of what I've heard on that, just in times when I've talked to low-income workers, is the healthcare situation, that people, if they are working full-time or even more than full-time, that they may be making just over the
yes,
cut for
agreed.
getting, Husky or state healthcare. So their choices are either work, 2 full-time jobs so they have enough money, or work part-time so they can get their healthcare.
Yes, so you just exactly said to me, Pete, you told me exactly what I just said. You said it a different way. It's a broken system. You're exactly right. So that's what people are able to figure out. Well, hey, in order to survive on my own, I have to work this hard. I'd be better off just working a little bit, and I'd end up at the same place because government would step in for the rest, even though they're capable of doing it. They're capable of working 2 full-time jobs, but they're not going to because of the healthcare thing. And that's something that we need to work on to incentivize people to go back to work and stop disincentivizing them to go back to work. That's a broken system. Look, when Shane and I were first married, the boys were little. I remember going 260 days in a row without a day off. That's through holidays, weekends. I didn't skip any days. I was working 40 hours a week at the police department, plus overtime, plus 36 hours a week at North Stonington Ambulance as an EMT, making $15 an hour at the time, because this was 2010-ish. I think my overtime rate at the PD at that time was, $40, $50 an hour, something like that. I have to go back and look. Point is, I was willing to go to work at the ambulance for significantly less pay because it put more money into my family. And I got 2 little boys at home. I'm working 70, 80, 90, 100 hours a week most weeks. 70 was a light week. And I did that for years. Shayna did the same thing. We barely saw each other. We slapped hands. All right, good. You got the boys. I get home at 2 o'clock in the morning from the police station. She had to be at work at the ambulance at 6. I got 3 hours of sleep. The boys were up, and I was up with them. And that's how we did things, So when people say, well, Gray doesn't understand the struggles of family. No, I do. But you know what? We worked hard, really hard. And we stuck together, and we worked it out. And, the boys are growing up now. We still work hard. I still have 2 jobs, obviously, right? And, Shayna works hard, too. So, when people are willing to work, it gets frustrated. And frankly, it was during that time when I started to pay attention, when I calculated what I just told you, that $16, because I was getting frustrated, working as hard as I am. And the harder I worked, the more they took. That's what I'm talking about, fixing the system. You know what I'm saying?
Onto another topic. How should Connecticut move forward to address climate change with regard to electric vehicles, wind power, and other clean energy strategies?
Look, you look at a map, Connecticut's a real small section of that. This notion that we're going to bankrupt businesses in Connecticut to save the climate is just unrealistic. I think that climate change needs to take place on a much bigger level than right here. What I do think we can do is lower energy costs here for ourselves and for our people. But the more that we try to attack climate change as this tiny little state in a big world, all we're doing is driving up energy costs to the end user. We're driving up energy costs, again, to 2010, Greg and Shana Howard, working 2 jobs, 3 jobs, trying to raise a little young family, getting slapped with high energy bills because we think that we're going to change the world. We have to be realistic about it, Erica. Electric vehicles, look, If people want to buy electric vehicles, that's awesome. Good for you. If I hear people say, "Oh, they're terrible. They're going to blow up." I say other people say the greatest thing in the world. Doesn't matter to me. If that's what you want to do, that's the beauty of America. If you want to go buy an electric vehicle, by all means, you can do that. Good for you. But I will say this: I will never support Tesla coming here to sell vehicles in the state of Connecticut outside the franchise laws that we hold our other dealerships to. Down in Stonington, for example, we have two major dealerships, Brucelon and Valenti's. They have to operate under franchise laws. Tesla continues to bring a bill where they want to be able to sell direct to consumer in their state and outside of those franchise laws. So they're going to sell vehicles in competition with Brucelon and Valenti's on a completely different playing field. So we're going to tell Valenti's and Brucelon that they have to play by the rules of chess, but Tesla, they don't have to play by the rules of checkers. I would never do that. They have too many jobs in our district for that. It's been quite a debate that's gone on. I've actually had a debate with constituents, and they say, well, I want a Tesla dealership in my district. Then don't vote for me, because until Tesla says, hey, we're going to work under the same rules as everybody else, then I'm not going to have them here.
And we have two general election voting related questions. First, do you think the 2020 election was conducted fairly and Joe Biden won?
I think Joe Biden won. Listen, look, was there corruption? Yeah. Or I shouldn't say that. Was there fraud? Yeah. I mean, people have been arrested for it, right? But if I'm going to believe that the system worked and to arrest those people for the fraud they committed, then I have to also believe that the system worked. Look, the previous president, Trump, was president for 2 months after that election. If it was truly wrought with fraud, I don't think the FBI is corrupt. I don't think that those agencies are corrupt. In fact, I think we have a lot of integrity in our law enforcement. I think there are people who go out and do things and cheat and lie and steal naturally. Were they able to do it in such a way to flip the election results when you look at the numbers? No, I don't think so. I've accepted Joe Biden as the president since November 4th or whatever the election day was. I've never spoken back about that. I don't think he's doing a great job. I think America probably regrets that. But nonetheless, he did win the election, and that's just how I feel.
And then in terms of voting itself, do you support early voting and voting by mail initiatives? And I guess, since that's not a yes or no question, what kind of caveats do you have to that, or what do you want to see in those types of...
Listen, I think that in America, everybody should have the opportunity to vote. We should incentivize people to vote. We should make it easy for them to vote, but we should also make sure that every person who is eligible to vote gets one and only one vote. And I think that's the important thing. So certainly when you open up early voting or mail-in voting, those are just more doors for fraud to come in. Does that mean that so much fraud would come in that it'll flip an election? No. And does that mean that we can't put in safeguards? Of course not. But I do think that folks who want to vote should have the opportunity to vote, whether early or mail-in, but as long as we have integrity processes to it. I think that the state of Connecticut, from what I've seen, I felt like the election in 2020 was handled fairly. I at least in my district. Obviously, I won. I have no complaints. But if you look at the numbers, the Democrats got massive. I think I lost 2-1 in mail-in ballots. Does that mean it was fraud, or does that mean that people who are more likely to vote Democrat were more likely to do mail-in? I would say it's the latter. I don't think it's wrought with fraud. Did I look at some of the mail-in ballots that came in and say, well, I happen to know these two people weren't in town. They were out of state, for school or whatever, and somehow they managed to vote by mail-in. Yeah, I saw that. Do I think that they actually did that, or somebody else did it at their direction? Probably. I know one lady in particular I talked to, and she said, I think I voted for you. My daughter filled out my ballot. Those things happen. You hope that people do it with a high level of integrity. All these years in policing, I've become somewhat cynical, but I do think that the average person is a good person. They'll do the right thing. But I do think also that partisan politics today have really brought the worst in a lot of people, including politicians, but a lot of other folks as well. I was talking to a guy the other day, and it's a little bit off topic, hope you don't mind, but I was talking to a guy the other day, I know him for a long time, and he says, I like you the way you were, you've changed. I said, how so? He goes, I don't know, you just changed. I said, what do you mean? I said, give me an example. Have I said something, done something different than the character that you knew for the 18 years preceding my election? Well, no, but you're Republican now. Well, okay, so because I have an R next to my name, I'm somehow different? And that's the sort of ire, the sort of culture that's being brought here, and I'm trying to work that back, the best I can. I try to go out and be, just unequivocally, unapologetically me, day after day. I don't take the shots well. I just try to deflect the best that I can, and I try to speak to everybody. I try not to play partisan politics. I don't look at somebody and say, well, you're a Democrat, so you must this or you must that, or you're a Republican, so you're automatically my friend. I get criticized by Republicans a lot too. I take it.
And kind of circling back to the early voting, would you support the referendum on the ballot this year
for the constitutional change?
Yeah.
Yeah. As long as we know that we have, we should be able to have signature verification. As long as we have integrity to it, I got no problem with it.
And then last question here. So, you came into, when you ran 2 years ago, a big part of your platform was talking about wanting to make some changes to the police accountability bill. So what are some of the changes that you still want to make for the police accountability bill and juvenile justice reform? And have you added anything over the past 2 years from what you wanted 2 years ago as well?
Yeah, so let's start with the first one, the police accountability bill. So I had a few issues with the police accountability bill. Some of the main ones that I thought were most damaging were, one, the CALEA accreditation. So for folks who aren't maybe not be familiar with that, CALEA is a private entity that does accreditation for law enforcement agencies. Here in Connecticut, we have some of the highest law enforcement standards and training in the nation. And that is not my opinion. That is the opinion of a lot of people within law enforcement, federally and statewide. So Police Officer Standing and Training Council in Connecticut has already an accreditation process in place that in large part mirrors what CALEA does. The issue is with CALEA, there was major infrastructure changes that some municipalities had to do, and things that were not necessarily great, didn't really move the needle much on professional standards, but were much more expensive. So that was one of my main focuses of police accountability. We were able to effectively do that in 2022, so we've gone to the post standard as a choice. So a few municipalities in the state that already had CALEA could stay with CALEA. The next thing was consent searches. Prior to the police accountability bill, a police officer could ask for consent to search a person or consent to search their vehicle. And the police accountability bill did away with that. There was major problems, especially in the realm of narcotics investigations. And when you talk about searches of persons, exemplar information for DNA, exemplar fingerprints, confidential informant buys, et cetera. So I was able to bring my experience to Hartford, and my colleagues up there recognized that, and we actually passed out of judiciary in 2021 a bill that put consent searches for vehicles and people back in effect, but with a safeguard. And I actually keystroked that. I wrote it myself, and it basically said that when an officer has reasonable articulable suspicion, that they can ask for consent. So what that did was that said, if police officers ask for consent, it can't be random, certainly can't be based on race, and it can't just be just because. It had to be a reason, and they had to articulate that reason. So in other words, I saw this vehicle go into a location I know is a narcotics location. They stayed 10 minutes, they came out. That's why I asked for consent. That seems pretty legitimate to me. It's not quite probable cause, so you can't search without consent. So we did get that out of judiciary. Unfortunately, in the Senate, they amended it. They took the vehicle part back out. So as it sits today, the consent search of people is back in for a legitimate purpose, like you need exemplar DNA, fingerprints, informant buys, et cetera. So I still need to work on the vehicle thing because I think it is important, especially, like I said, in narcotics. One of the other things was use of force. So, and that ties into qualified immunity. So the qualified immunity issue that came in the police accountability bill was really a burden of municipalities, far more so than the individual. And that sort of got convoluted along the way. But the biggest issue that officers are having right now is they don't know what's expected of them anymore in the realm of use of force. It's not pretty, but police officers do have to use force. I can think of a situation where we had to, it wasn't Stonington, but in law enforcement, where there was an out-of-control high school student. The social worker, the guidance counselor, et cetera, tried to calm this kid down. They couldn't. The police officer shows up, and he ends up going hands-on with the guy, and they're criticizing me. You didn't have to be physical. Well, you already tried everything else. Unfortunately, yes, we do sometimes, but we have a framework within when we can do that, how we do it, et cetera, that in Connecticut has been, again, at the leading in professional standards for years. The standards, the training, all in line with Supreme Court cases, some of the most restrictive policies and procedures on police officers, but a system that worked, and it worked well. Do people step outside and do it wrong sometimes? Yes. People do it wrong in every profession. But largely, it was done correctly. In their attempt to do something in 2020, they put in this crazy use of force jargon they codified it into state law. And frankly, if you can read through it and you have the time to sit through and go page by page and line by line and whatnot, you can get to where I think it was headed to go, which was how basically it always was. And I talk about California's law in 2019. They passed AB 392. And, I don't memorize a lot of House bill numbers, but I happen to memorize that one because I've talked about it so much. If you read that, it hits what Connecticut, I believe, was attempting to do in 2020, but it does it in a way that's in keeping with the Graham v. Connor case law that we've been trained on for 2 decades, the Tennessee Garner case that we've been trained on for 2 decades. And it does it in a way police officers can look at it and say, okay, yeah, this is how we've always done it. This makes sense to me. And I've brought that to the other side. And the other side has said to me on numerous occasions, well, yeah, this would work. This is actually a much cleaner way of what we were trying to do, but we're not going to change it now. I said, but you're confusing officers. They're afraid to go to work. They don't know what they're supposed to do. If we just change it to this, we've accomplished the same goal and we've clarified it for them so they can go back to work. We're not doing it. I mean, that's just obstructive. That's all they want to do is be obstructive on that. So that's something that I continue to work on. I'm not even trying to change the substance of what we're doing. I'm trying to clarify it so it makes sense. So the 9,000 police officers in the state can go back to work and combat crime. And the last thing, that the 1033 program, where we get surplus from the military. Look, I understand the concerns there. We're not a military organization. We don't want our police officers to be military units. But the military, because of a lack of government efficiency, as I talked about earlier, does offload a lot of stuff that is perfectly fine and can save municipalities money. So it would be nice to go back and have, we have an inspector general now, or we have post, to have somebody be able to apply and say, hey, I'd like not just to keep something I already have, but I'd like to acquire this, may I? And take a look and say, okay, this makes sense for that particular district, for this particular thing, what do they call them? That we call them MRAPs, like a tank type vehicle, not a tank, but something like that, an armored vehicle. Trying to put it in layman's terms, where that's going from one municipality in the state to another because they need it for flood zone. So it's set up as a rescue vehicle. All the armament's off it. It's set up as a rescue vehicle. What a waste if we couldn't do that. So those are the things specific to the police bill that I think we've got work done and we need to work on. Now, juvenile justice. Look, I say things that don't make me very popular, and I'll do it here again. I worked hard on that juvenile justice bill. Did we get somewhere? Yes. Is it where I wanted to be? No. And again, I go back to government efficiency, Erica. And I know in all my experience with kids and law enforcement, there are kids that are really salvageable. Like, they are just in a bad environment. We just got to give them opportunities. And if we do, they'll be successful. There are other kids who have just made a decision, whether it's something in their brain or something that's happened in their life so far that you can't correct. They're just going to continue to do bad things, no matter what opportunities. And we have plenty of, this is not anecdotal evidence, there's empirical evidence about this, where we've given them every opportunity in the book and they continue to commit crime and go to jail. Where I differ from some of the people who I debate this is, I think if we have 100 units of resources to put into it, we should put as much of those, and we have 100 kids, say we have 100 units of resources and 100 kids that we are targeting. And of those 100 kids, 70 of them we know are salvageable. 30 of them, we can tell they're probably heading in a bad direction no matter how we try to do it. I think we should take 100% of those resources and allocate it to 70% that we can save, that we can help, that we can get on the right track to break that cycle, because there is a cycle when it comes to juvenile crime. And then try to take next year, say, okay, we did 70, let's try to go to 75, and let's try to work it up. But instead, we come up with 100 units of resources, and we're going to save the world on one shot, and we're going to take 100 units of resources, one-to-one with those 100 kids, and we fail on most of them. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't feel good to the heart. Listen, nobody puts more time into that district of kids than I do. It doesn't feel good to the heart to say, look, we just have to confess that these kids are not going to make it. They're going to go down a life of crime, and we just have to deal with it. It doesn't feel good, but I'm just trying to be reasonable with taxpayer dollars and doing the best I can to break those cycles where we can. Because for every cycle we don't break, it perpetuates. And what I say earlier, the need grows bigger, the program grows greater. So that's where we just have to start to be a bit more realistic about it.